Kamala Harris is pro-business. She's going center 100%. I mean, literally, if you read the transcript of her speech yesterday, she's talked more about entrepreneurs and helping them have access to investment and making it easier for people to invest in startups than any president that I've ever heard talk about startups and entrepreneurs.
So here's a name we've not discussed in a while, but let's check in on good old Mark Cuban. Anyone remember him? He's been hiding in a hole ever since his humiliation back in November of 2024. But if you recall to those times, he was functioning as basically one of the Democrat Party's and Kamala Harris's top surrogates. And the entire point of really putting him out there was to say, hey, to men, to the business community, the Democrat Party are not these terrifying woke communists that you think they are. They're going to be sensible. Look, I'm on the team. You can be as well. And of course, we know how that went. But quite hilariously, all of a sudden now, Mark Cuban is realizing that he was lying to himself about all of this, because ever since he tried to get out there and say the Democrats are pro-business, you know, they're not going to be radical on any of these things, he is now fighting with Ro Khanna, Bernie Sanders, and the California Democrat Party over the idea of putting a wealth tax on billionaires. Of course, we've covered this a couple different times, but in recent weeks, it is now the case that it looks like potentially this billionaire tax is going to pass. Not only has it gained traction with the rising DSA community, but now even the California Democrat Party has basically bucked Gavin Newsom and said, no, we want to do this wealth tax. And all of a sudden, Mark Cuban, the guy who stood alongside all of these people and basically said they're not radical, they're not going to do exactly the things conservatives are warning about, is realizing how utterly wrong he was. And now he wants takebacks. Now he wants refunds, to which I say, Mark, no refunds. That's not how it works. You get what you deserve, right? These are the people you thought it would be a good idea to enable. You, for example, because let's not forget, sat there and just denied the fact that the Kamala Harris campaign in 2024 proposed an idea very similar to this. If you remember, she was trying to tax unrealized capital gains, which is exactly what a wealth tax also would be, right? A tax on your assets, on net worth, on cash money, basically, that doesn't actually exist because it's not liquid. And yes, it goes without saying, Mark Cuban understands why that's bad for business, that's bad for the economy, because billionaires are either going to move, or even if they have to pay it, they're just going to sell off a bunch of their assets. And then you have this sort of situation where, you know, a lot of the potential business that they would be generating otherwise for the economy is no longer there. By the way, think about all the stocks that would have to be liquidated, right? For example, if you try to do a wealth tax on Elon Musk, okay, so you mean to tell me a bunch of Tesla stock would crash and people's 401ks would go under, right? This is what I call sloppyism. This is dumb kind of populist coded economics that sounds good to people because I'm struggling and, oh, those damn billionaires, they're the bad guys. But when you actually think about the practice of this in reality, obviously it's going to be terrible. And for California, a state that's already dealing with a mass exodus and, by the way, financial problems, partially because of the fact that people, the tax base in general, both middle-class people and the billionaires are kind of fleeing out of the state en masse. This is only going to make it even worse for them. Mark Cuban has now come out and is trying to say, hey, Democrats, don't do this. But unfortunately for you, Mark, I don't know how you're just realizing this, but this is your political party, right? This is what these people are support. You can't ignore a movement that's been saying tax the rich for the past 20 years and now suddenly say, wait a minute, Democrats, why are we taxing the rich? That's what they said they were going to do. We believe them. Why didn't you? I don't know, but let's talk about it because it is objectively kind of hilarious. Mark, what happened? First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Turn on notifications, all of that. Support the channel. We greatly appreciate the support. And with all of that said, let's start, of course, yesterday we actually covered how the California Democrat Party, who supposedly, according to the socialists, is a, establishment institution, they're bought by Newsom or whatever. Clearly not the case. They actually voted to throw Newsom under the bus because Newsom is against the wealth tax for pragmatic reasons. They said, no, we're endorsing the wealth tax. And considering that's going to, yes, be a ballot proposition in November, if the California Democrat Party is endorsing it, I think you know the way this is going to go. But of course, it shouldn't also be a surprise that leftist Congressman Ro Khanna, we call him Congressman Tung 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 Sohor, has also gotten behind this, which is kind of what elicited a response from Mark Cuban. Because keep in mind, Tung Sohor is representing, sort of the Silicon Valley. He's from Northern California. And so you would think he probably ought to know better as to why this is a bad idea. But, he likes to LARP and cosplay as this progressive revolutionary character. So, of course, here's what he had to say.
The California Democratic Party and the California labor movement just stood with Bernie Sanders and me in supporting a 5% wealth tax on 250 California billionaires. Passing this ballot initiative will ensure that millions of working class and middle class Californians don't lose their health care. Look, the Sacramento establishment and lobbyists are just blatantly out of touch. What this shows is that California voters want a Democratic Party that will stand up for the working class over the billionaire class.
Yeah, so that's Congressman Tung Sohor's take on the situation. We do also have here, as you can see, this artist depiction of him fighting with Mark Cuban, and I find that to be pretty visually accurate. But I'm also glad that Tung Sohor made the accidental admission, and we've pointed this out too, by the way, as to what this billionaire tax is actually for. Where is that money going to go? Because while it's obviously important just to explain the flawed economics to all of this stuff, as we say so often, when Democrats say affordability or helping working people, they're not referring to you. As a matter of fact, yes, in many cases, the supposed working people are literally illegal aliens. And yes, do understand, that is where this idea came from. Because, and we talked about this throughout the year, and you might remember this story even if you haven't been subscribed to the channel. Anyone remember when last year California's Medi-Cal system, which is basically Medicaid, right? So healthcare, free healthcare for poor people, started going bankrupt. They were hemorrhaging money essentially because they were spending somewhere between $4 to $8 billion a year on Medicaid for illegal aliens. That's literally what it was. That's what triggered the budget crisis in California. That's why they've been in this financial situation. It's because of illegal alien healthcare. And I kid you not, right? That's what they're openly saying it's about. Because then it was like some left-wing nurses union or something along those lines, right? This healthcare worker movement that started the whole billionaire tax idea to basically save Medi-Cal. Ro Khanna, by the way, mentions, yes, it's about bailing out Medi-Cal, which, again, literally went bankrupt because it was paying for too many illegal aliens. And that's where they're saying the billionaire's tax is going to go. So even if, by the way, you are someone who is not fond of the billionaires, maybe you're more populist on economics, please do understand, it's not just about tax policy. It's also, yes, a question of where the money goes. If you think that money will ever make it back into your pocket as a working person who's not defrauding Medicaid or healthcare or welfare in this country, I have bad news for you, okay? So just understand, that's how actually insane this idea is. Not only are they going to cause a massive economic and financial crisis in California, they're explicitly, in their own words, doing it to bail out illegal aliens and to make sure illegal aliens keep free healthcare, okay? That's how screwed up the Democrat Party actually is. And no, we're not exaggerating this. Go watch some of our past coverage on this subject if you want more details. But still, all of that said, okay, so here we have Mark Cuban coming in as the guy who is suddenly magically finding out apparently what the Democrat Party stands for. You know, it's not like they've always supported this. Mark Cuban told Representative Ro Khanna that he, quote, doesn't understand business during a heated clash over California's proposed 5% billionaire wealth tax, warning it could drive startup founders and investors out of this state. Here's what he basically had to say. Cuban responded to Ro Khanna by arguing that founders of rapidly appreciating startups, so basically the value of the business, the stock price, all of those things going up, right? They're hot entrepreneurs or whatever, can be billionaires on paper without having hundreds of millions of dollars in liquid assets available to pay the proposed tax, which is, yes, correct. That is, by the way, how net worth works. I know that apparently financial literacy is not all that prevalent in the United States of America. But yes, when you Google someone, for example, and it says their net worth is $4 million, that doesn't mean that literally their net worth, they have $4 million in cash. It means their cash and the accumulation of the assets are valued approximately to be about $4 million. To which I also say, by the way, Think back even to that whole civil fraud case against Donald Trump. Who's going to be the entity determining what your net worth is, right? Because, for example, what is the price of your house? You have the Zillow estimate, sure, but it doesn't guarantee that's going to be the sale price, right? An asset's value, yes, is controlled by market factors, but to some degree can be subjective. It can be negotiated. So just do keep that in mind, and please understand their economic illiteracy here, right? It's not just about, oh, why do you care if a billionaire has another yacht or not? You know, bro, no, it's actually about this is going to affect workers, businesses, the long-term growth of not just the economy, but also the tax base, right? Because as we brought up before, when all these billionaires inevitably leave the state and those stupid ones who choose to stay, probably as Cuban is pointing out here, are going to have to kind of kneecap the growth of their own business. And so long-term, they're actually going to contribute less tax revenue to the state of California. And by the way, in their own words, all California Democrats are going to do is use it for a giant bailout for their Medicaid for illegal aliens problem, which is to say, California is not going to fix its own budget, right? They're still going to have this huge deficit and this spending problem to deal with, regardless of whether they tax the billionaires, because they've already told us, right, again, what they're going to spend the money on. And it's not even about fixing their long-term problems. It's about actually making those long-term problems worse. Then, folks, of course, what's going to happen when you have the billionaires who already are paying the most in taxes? They're going to leave the state. So you lost your top tax base there. California refuses to spend less. Okay, so who's going to get taxed next? That is, of course, the middle class. That is the people who stuck behind. And that's assuming, by the way, you still yourself have a job, have a 401k, you're gainfully employed and all that stuff and doing well, because, obviously if these companies leave the state, if their stock prices crash because the CEO has to liquidate a bunch of it because of what California is doing, that's not going to be good for your own economic prospects either, okay? So you can call it whatever you want, but you're saying it's trickle-down economics or something. I'm just telling you how the real world works, okay? You can sit there and just say, I'm lying or I'm being bought by the Koch brothers or whatever, okay? But yeah, I almost kind of hope that California does this so we can see how it all works. We can see what happens, People want to vote for it, they'll get what they deserve. But Cuban is, yes, correct in warning that the measure could cause startup founders and investors to leave the state of California. And yes, by the way, too, even if you're a startup and you're looking for, you say you're a Shark Tank person, right? To bring up a Mark Cuban example, you're starting a business, you want to get investors, you want some rich person to say, hey, buy some of a stake in my company so that way I have money to grow and all that stuff. Okay, let me also point out the other thing that's going to happen here. You know what else is going to decrease? Especially startup investment and investment overall in general. Again, why is that? Well, because what is the benefit of investing? It's kind of like, hey, you buy into this, whether it's real estate or the stock market or buying a stake in someone's startup business, right? The whole appeal of that is literally that, hey, I'll get in early, I'll buy this now, over time the value is going to appreciate, and then one day maybe I'll sell it off or something and I cash out, or I just have this asset to my name. Okay, fair enough. Good thing to do, right? Good investment. If there's going to be now, apparently, taxes on unrealized capital gains. Basically, all that happens if you invest is you more or less lose a bunch of money as a result of it. You have to pay more in taxes, et cetera, et cetera. What's the point of investing in someone else, right? If it's not meaningful to you, if it doesn't yield an upside to you, why would you want to invest in someone's startup or small business, right? Think about the future of Shark Tank, for example, at that point. So this is all true. Now, the fact that Mark Cuban is the messenger of it is highly ironic, although maybe there's a function, I don't know, in hearing it from your own side, but you kind of know the current vibe, by the way, on the DSA side. I think that, if anything, this is another case of kind of a cowardly billionaire who, even towards the very end, even when a bunch of other billionaires were trying to hop off the ship, was trying to appease the liberals, play it safe, whatever, and now he's realizing, oh, this is not going to work. Oh, they're still going to hate me anyway. Okay, let me try to point something out here. I'm, not thinking it really works that way. Mark Cuban's a massive hypocrite too, by the way, because, he's now complaining about what leftists do when they're in power for business. While, of course, you remember back to 2024, he was trying to dispel all of those myths, right? He was trying to say that, oh, the Democrat policies are good for business, actually, and, these are all just Republican talking points. While, of course, highly ironic, this guy is operating out of where? He's based out of where, ladies and gentlemen? Texas. Oh, you mean to tell me the Republican state with an extremely business-friendly environment, right? But he sits there and says, guys, don't fall for the propaganda. Left-wing economics works, guys. The liberals are good. The Democrats are good. It's actually a good thing for business. By the way, I live in literally the most business-friendly state in the United States with no state income tax. I believe no corporate tax. I could be wrong on that. Someone can correct me, but we know it's a very business friendly environment, right? One of the lowest minimum wages, et cetera, et cetera. But guys, the Democrats really work. That's why I don't operate out of a Democrat state. And then now, he's being forced to admit the truth. So further, he said here, quote, if this passes, only idiot startup founders would stay in California, which is correct. Unsuccessful ones too, by the way. And Cuban went further, warning that the measure could also influence where he invests, to which I say, yeah. He added here further, quote, ideology is not a strategy, Ro, which is completely true. But we have kind of established, right, about these DSA characters, the communists, whatever you want to call them. And part of the reason why I don't make much of a distinction is because that assumes this is actually about any type of economic ideology, as we described many times. It's really not communism. They always say it's not real communism. It is, because what it ultimately really boils down to is a social condition where, yes, the bitter, most resentful, loser, lowest common denominator aspects of society get envious and jealous of those in the world who are, usually contributing to society, doing healthy things with their lives, like Karl Marx, the original basement dwelling loser. It's that kind of people who that appeals to. And, it's kind of at the point to which they all get mobilized to rise up and mass murder, basically, the people who they feel are their bullies growing up or whatever. I mean, that's really what communism is, okay? That's why, for example, you could try to say, oh, well, what's the difference between Soviet communism and Chinese communism and this kind of different stuff, or anarcho-communism? Why does it always end in the same kind of situation and pattern of misery? Because it's about the type of people who ultimately, you look at the Communist Manifesto, for example. We could have the economic debate about why it doesn't work. Okay, we've been over that a million times. But really, all that is yes, Karl Marx, a bitter, jealous, resentful loser, literally the dredge of society, sits in his basement, writes up an entire kind of manifesto to rationalize his bitter, envious, jealous, loser resentment towards society, and then they call it a political ideology. It's not a political ideology, right? That's exactly why. I mean, it's so basic as to why, especially on the statewide level, the California wealth tax is a terrible idea that doesn't make any sense. But it doesn't have to make sense. Any way in which the jealous, bitter, resentful losers can feel like they're getting back at the people above them, right? It doesn't really matter if it works. You understand? They don't care if it actually helps and does the things they promise at the end of the day. We got back at those who we feel are better than us because we're envious, jealous, bitter, resentful losers. So therefore, it's a victory. Still, regardless, okay, so here was Ro Khanna's his attempt to try to push back. So Khanna then proposed a workaround for founders whose wealth is largely tied up in a private company stock, which is the point that Cuban brought up there. He says, quote, why not a non-recourse loan for pledged stock as collateral for this situation, Khanna wrote. So basically he's saying, oh, you borrow against your stock then, you can take out a loan to pay for the 5% tax there effectively, okay? But Cuban here responded by pointing out, quote, Ro, that's insane. Cuban argued that California would effectively lend founders money that would be immediately returned to the state as a payment of the tax, which is, yes, that's correct, right? Oh, you can take out a loan from the state of California to pay our tax. Oh, so California is going to give out money and then take it back? How is that going to help, especially immediately? I guess you get interest payments over time, but that's not going to add up to kind of the original initial amount that you were, trying to get from the billionaires, unless you're charging 100% interest or some crazy amount like that, right? So what is actually the point of that? Like, California is not actually getting money back, right? So Cuban argued California would effectively lend the founders money that would be immediately returned to the statement as a payment of the tax, meaning the arrangement would initially generate no additional cash revenue from those taxpayers, which is, yes, exactly the point. Like, what? Oh, you can't pay for your taxes? Here, I'll give you the money to pay for for your taxes, and you can give it back to me. And I'll make, I don't know, 5% interest on it. Haha, I won. I got your tax revenue. No, all you got was a couple of interest payments. That's all you profited, right? So you didn't actually get the amount of money that's not how taxes are supposed to work. So yeah, he goes on further to say, quote, what's the point of that? And, he went on here to basically say, Ro, that's insane. You want the state to loan money to the founder, who will then immediately give it back to the state as a wealth tax, meaning, yeah, the whole thing is completely pointless. I mean, yes, absolutely true. But, again, this is all assuming that, this is really an ideology we're dealing with and not just, sloppyism from the bitter and resentful, which, of course, we know to be the truth. And to Mark Cuban, I just have to double down on that question. Why do you suddenly now realize, oh, the Democrats have been talking about doing this literally forever, okay? It didn't concern you in 2024 when Kamala proposed an idea similar to this. You tried to talk it down, whatever. I don't know. It's kind of funny to watch yet another story of an establishment Democrat who empowered these characters and is now shocked when they're coming out of the woodworks and they're eating their own, perhaps, if you want to use that type of phraseology. But anyways, folks, there you have it. That said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.